When people talk about the saddest scene in The Sopranos, they usually bring up Adriana. Watching Adriana desperately hold on to the idea that she's about to start a new life, only to realize too late what's actually happening, is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire series. But there are a lot of contenders. There's Junior's final scene where Tony realizes that the man who shaped his entire life doesn't even remember who he is anymore. There's Christopher's death. A man who spent his entire life chasing the approval of a father figure, only to die staring into that same father's face. There's Dr. Melfi's assault, one of the most disturbing and difficult episodes to watch in the entire show. The point is, The Sopranos isn't exactly lacking in depressing moments, but despite all of those scenes, the one that has always stayed with me the most is AJ's suicide attempt. What makes this moment so heartbreaking is that it feels like years of fear, anxiety, and failure finally catching up with the entire Soprano family at once. Throughout the series, AJ is often treated as a joke. He's lazy, he's spoiled, he's constantly compared to the people around him and almost never lives up to expectations. But by the final season, something changes. For the first time, AJ starts struggling with many of the same problems that have haunted Tony for years. Depression, panic, a feeling that life has no real meaning. The more AJ tries to find a purpose, the more lost he seems to become, and eventually he reaches a point where he simply can't see a future for himself anymore.
You sound depressed again.
I mean, how can anybody not be?
What makes AJ's story so tragic is that Tony spends most of the series pretending they're nothing alike. Whenever AJ gets into trouble, Tony treats it like some kind of personal failure. He often talks about the strong, silent type, men like Gary Cooper, people who don't complain, don't overthink everything, and don't spend their lives questioning themselves. Tony clearly admires that kind of person. The problem is that Tony isn't that person either. Throughout the entire series, Tony struggles with panic attacks and depression. He spends years in therapy trying to understand why he feels the way he does.
This shit, I don't feel nothing. Nothing. Dead. Empty.
Yet, whenever AJ begins showing those same traits, Tony reacts with frustration rather than understanding.
It's ever how I feel.
Oh, poor you.
In many ways, AJ becomes a reflection of everything Tony hates about himself. AJ cuts corners. He lacks discipline. He drifts through life looking for an easy answer. When AJ gets fired from Blockbuster, it's not just another example of him being lazy. It's another reminder that he isn't becoming the son Tony imagined. And the more AJ struggles, the more frustrated Tony becomes. But I don't think Tony is really angry at AJ. I think he's angry because he recognizes himself. The panic attacks, the depression, those aren't AJ's problems. They're Tony's problems too. That's why some of the most uncomfortable moments between them happen when AJ starts becoming more like Tony. Because Tony can't lecture his son without indirectly criticizing himself. For years, Tony talks about the strong, silent type, the kind of man who keeps moving forward no matter what. But the reality is that neither Tony nor AJ is that person, and by the end of the series, Tony is forced to watch his son struggle with many of the same demons that have haunted him for years. And the more AJ starts showing those traits, the more frustrated Tony becomes. There are multiple moments throughout the series where Tony seems genuinely irritated by his son. Not just disappointed, but resentful. Whenever AJ struggles, Tony rarely responds with understanding. Instead, he gets angry. He mocks him. He tells him to toughen up. And at times, it almost feels like Tony can't stand being around him. What's interesting is that this frustration only seems to grow as AJ gets older. The more AJ starts dealing with anxiety, depression, and a lack of direction, the more hostile Tony becomes. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because it's easy to criticize somebody else's weaknesses. It's much harder when those weaknesses look familiar. At one point, Tony even admits to Dr. Melfi that there are times when he hates his son.
How about the fact that I hate my son? I want to fucking smash his fucking face in.
It's a shocking thing to hear from a father. But I've never interpreted that as Tony truly hating AJ. I think Tony hates being reminded of parts of himself he'd rather ignore. And unfortunately for Tony, AJ becomes that reminder more and more as the series goes on. There are plenty of moments that show how much Tony genuinely cares about his son. When AJ has panic attacks, Tony immediately recognizes what's happening. When AJ struggles, Tony constantly worries about where his life is heading. And despite all the arguments, all the disappointment, and all the frustration, Tony never stops trying to help him. The problem is that Tony often doesn't know how. Like so many relationships in The Sopranos, love and frustration become completely intertwined. Tony wants AJ to be stronger, more confident, but underneath all of that criticism is a father who desperately wants his son to be okay. And I think a big part of that comes from guilt. Throughout the series, Tony becomes increasingly worried that AJ inherited more from him than he realizes. At several points in the show, Tony openly worries that he passed something down to his son, almost as if AJ has been poisoned by the same things that have haunted him his entire life. And that's a terrifying thought for Tony, because for all of his flaws, Tony knows exactly how much he suffers.
It's in his blood, this miserable fucking existence. My rotten fucking putrid genes have infected my kid's soul.
He knows what it feels like to wake up every day carrying that weight around, and now he's watching his son experience the same thing. In many ways, it brings the entire series full circle. For years, Tony blamed his mother for the person he became. He spent countless therapy sessions talking about the damage she caused and the things she passed down to him. But by the final season, Tony finds himself in a position he never expected. He's no longer the child, he's the parent, and for the first time, he's forced to wonder whether he's passed his own pain onto the next generation, whether AJ is suffering because of the same things that made Tony who he is. That's why AJ's suicide attempt feels like so much more than a tragic moment. For Tony, it's the realization that his worst fear may have been true all along.
Want my advice, Anthony? Don't expect happiness. It's all a big nothing.
Is this all there is?
What's the fucking point?
And then comes the scene, the moment where all of those fears suddenly become real. AJ reaches his breaking point. After seasons of drifting through life, struggling with depression, anxiety, and a complete lack of direction, he decides he can't do it anymore. He ties a cinder block to his leg, walks out to the pool, and jumps. What's so devastating about the scene is how quickly everything falls apart. The second AJ hits the water, he panics. He changes his mind. He wants to live, but by then he's trapped. And as he struggles to free himself, Tony arrives home. For a split second, he doesn't even understand what he's looking at. Then he sees AJ beneath the water and immediately jumps in. He pulls him out of the pool and drags him to safety. AJ is crying, and then he says, It's such a simple line, but it's one of the most emotional moments in the entire series. For years, Tony has worried about AJ. He sees him becoming depressed. He sees him struggling to find meaning in life. He sees the same anxiety and hopelessness that have followed him for years. And now all of it has led to this moment. A moment where Tony almost loses his son. It's almost as if Tony realizes that the poison he talked about earlier really did reach AJ. The thing he spent years fearing, the thing he blamed on his upbringing, his mother, his genes, and his own mistakes as a father, is suddenly right in front of him. That's why I think this scene hits so hard. It's the culmination of years of fear, guilt, and frustration finally catching up with both of them. And it's also a perfect example of what makes The Sopranos so special. One moment you're laughing at something ridiculous. The next moment you're watching one of the most heartbreaking scenes in television. Very few shows can switch between comedy and tragedy so effortlessly, and even fewer can make both feel completely real. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe. I've really been enjoying making these Sopranos analysis videos and reading all the comments. If you have any suggestions for a character, episode, or scene I should cover next, let me know below. Thanks for watching.